So, instead of taking too much of time, I want to conclude. As I said this afternoon, 5,000-year leap. This book is becoming one of the required reading material for council work. You know that now. So his work is becoming part of the council work. And we are truly the team together to save America, save the world, and preserve our great heritage, our freedom, and our traditional values. So tonight, he came all the way from Salt Lake City to speak to this congregation. He knew that these are the group of people coming from the Unification Church leadership. When we requested for the special, speaking engagement, he said, for that group, I would drop anything. In his busy schedule, he came to speak to us. It is an extraordinary effort, and we are so deeply grateful. So tonight, I would like you to join with me to welcome Dr. Cleon Skousen as a hero of our unification movement. Dr. Cleon Skousen.
I feel very humble after that welcome and that beautiful introduction by someone for whom I have a great affection and great admiration. I congratulate you for being here. When I think of the youth of this land, they're lost, wandering, perplexed, and I look into your faces, you know where you're going. You know what you have to do. You know that you live in a time of divine destiny. And I congratulate you for being here, for having made the pilgrimage intellectually and spiritually that brought you here. I have just listened to the 3 videotapes by Reverend Tom McDavitt. And I think I have a better appreciation of the theology of the Unification Church than I would have had otherwise, although I had read a number of books. It was so clearly presented by an expert teacher, and as a fellow teacher, I congratulate him. I don't know whether he's here tonight or, well, hello. Hello. I have never seen anyone who could make a chalk talk so well on the blackboard, so precisely, and cover so much ground. And I found, of course, so many of the things he was emphasizing in complete harmony with my own philosophy and theology. So we have a great work to do. And I had a thrilling experience in the car coming up with Colonel Polk. I said, when did Reverend Moon come to the United States? He said, 1971. And that is the year I felt so impelled to start a great new educational program for Americans about America. They'd lost their way. And we started it the 4th of July, 1971. I think we're part of something that's a lot bigger than we are. Now, when I attended the first CASA meeting, I sat there fascinated. Now, you see, Marxism is one of my areas of specialization in the FBI. Marxism is not easy to deal with. It's being taught in our major universities all across this continent with absolutely no repudiation, no refutation, no rebuttal, not even clarification. And as I sat in the first CASA meeting, I said, this is the first and most impressive and persuasive scientific explanation of the fallacy of Hegel and Marx I have ever heard. And I told my wife at the time, this just warms my heart to see somebody who can come to grips with the few people who really want to understand Marxism and are not just taken in by its propaganda. If they really want to know whether or not there was any merit to their dialectical confusion, CASA has the best answer. Now, in The Naked Communist, I put down the 25 major fallacies of communist theory. But there's a deeper theory below that I didn't come to grip with. Oh, I did in a minor sort of way, but there were so few minds that would even have an interest in it, I didn't want them to get lost in the first chapter. And so I moved on to the 25 fallacies that they could probably understand better. But you see, in CASA, you take the serious scholar who really has been converted to communism, like Whittaker Chambers was, and Elizabeth Bentley, who were intellectual converts to communism or Marxism, and open it up. Now, it took Whittaker Chambers a period of years to realize that the major fallacy of Marxism was an error. He was feeding pablum to his little daughter in an apartment in Baltimore. At the time, he was the #1 Soviet courier, a dedicated communist, one of the most brilliant American minds ever converted to Marxism. And as he was watching that little girl try to get that pablum down, and if you've ever watched a baby fed pablum, it's quite an operation. You put it in and then wipe it off and put it in again. And sometimes you taste a little yourself to convince them it's good. Anyway, it gave him a chance to meditate upon her ear. And his mind began to reflect on the fact, thank you, that it was a beautiful ear. It looked as though it had been designed by somebody, that it wasn't a product of accident. It even matched the one on the other side. He said to himself, how fortunate that that ear wasn't like a donkey's ear. How it would have changed her profile and personality. Or if it had been like a bloodhound's ear, kind of lapped down on her shoulder. He said, how magnificent that it was so beautifully shaped like a shell. And he said in his book, that's the moment God touched me on the forehead and said, it was no accident. It was designed. Oh, he said, that bourgeois thinking is coming back to me. And he tried to force it out of his mind. It was impossible. And that is when he left the great Soviet conspiracy. He got the word to President Roosevelt that one of his foremost aides and confidants was the #1 espionage agent in the United States, Alger Hiss. President Roosevelt didn't believe the message. And it frightened the life out of Whittaker Chambers, and he went into hiding and slept with a gun under his pillow for at least a year. The FBI lost track of him. We needed him. We didn't know what had happened to him. And Lo and behold, he turned up several years later as the senior editor of Time. He was a great writer. He killed himself for Time magazine, working once a week for 36 hours without sleep to put the edition to bed, trying to turn the staff of Time magazine around during World War II to appreciate that they were patronizing one of the most vicious, evil forces in the world. He didn't entirely succeed, but he resigned when we got him to surface again, testified against Alger Hiss, was called every name under the sun, and died, unfortunately, at a time when we were just barely getting acquainted. In any event, he made a great contribution in his own right and suffered as a martyr, like so many people do who do a good job. But in any event, I just wanted to remind you that there are some very keen intellectuals out there who have been persuaded that Marxism was right, that Hegel's dialectics was correct, and that this is the explanation for everything in existence, so there doesn't really have to be a creator factor. See, that's what's so vicious about it. It wipes out the need for a creator factor. And it's based on a principle, of course, that by bringing together two opposites in conflict, they naturally eventually break apart and explode, but synthesize at a higher level, always at a higher level. Of course, it violates the second law of thermodynamics, but don't worry about that. It's a nice story. And so that's the way they explain everything coming into a higher and higher order of things. That's been blasted. Kaus is doing such a great job, and because Marxism is so prevalent in Latin America and becoming prevalent here, it has a divine mission of enlightenment, of education, of information and inspiration to replace the dead, dying, and decadent message of Marxism. So I'm happy to be here. I feel I'm among my brothers and sisters of a great ongoing world movement to perform a service which God has had to wait all too long to have achieved. Now I'm going to just tell you a few things briefly, and then maybe while you're standing up for a little rest, I'll have distributed some pamphlets here that will tell you a little bit about what we're doing. You know, when we started out, I couldn't think of a name for our organization. But the founding father said, these are the inalienable rights of freemen. They didn't say Americans. Freemen. That's all over the world. The Magna Carta said, these are the rights of freemen. So I thought, that's a great name. That's a great name. Let's inspire people to understand what it means to be a freeman again. So we call it the Freeman Institute. But lately we've been instructing hundreds and hundreds, several thousand public school teachers. Their legislatures passed laws that they have to teach the Constitution now. They don't know what to teach. And so they've called us in to help them kind of catch the vision of it. When I was introduced last year as president of the Freeman Institute, hand goes up, who's Mr. Freeman? I said, well, that's you. Oh? Where's your headquarters? Salt Lake City. Oh, Mormon. No. This is for everybody. Every church, every political party. Take me about 45 minutes before I can start delivering my message. And you know, names really aren't important. The message is important. And if the name is getting in the way of the message, nothing sacred about the name. Most names, there are one or two names that are sacred, but most names aren't. Move it away, move it away. And it's like in some of my, in the Freeman Digest, for example, you'll see several names there that, for example, there's one named Willard Woods. When you've been in this so long, you write an awful lot. So my staff has said, now put that in, that's a good one. I said, I don't like to see my name there so much. They said, well, change the name. So there's one Willard Woods. So that's my first name, Willard. And Woods is my name is Skousen for Danish. I mean, is English for Skousen. Skousen is a Danish name, means woods. So Willard Woods is in the magazine. And and Absalom Smith is in the magazine. Now that's my great-great-grandfather. And so we thought it'd be nice to have him in the magazine. He liked these kinds of things. Anyway, nothing particularly sacred about a name. And so the Freeman Institute was getting in the way. So when we began teaching congressmen and senators, their staff, and some of the leaders in Washington, we said our program was from the National Center of Constitutional Studies. And everything went just fine. And when the National Board heard how well it went, they said, why don't we just adopt that name? So we reincorporated in Washington, D.C. I have just returned from addressing a large number of public school teachers in Texas. And I was introduced as chairman of the board of the National Center for Constitutional Studies, Washington, D.C. You'd be amazed what the reaction is. They said, oh, we heard about that. Now, what they really mean is they heard about the Constitution. And they heard about Washington, D.C. So it must be all right. So that's what we have done. That's why we will keep the name Freeman Digest, however. We love that name Freeman, because we're all Freeman. But we're going to, the name now is the National Center for Constitutional Studies, Washington, D.C. And while we're keeping our headquarters for research and printing and so forth in Salt Lake City, Margaret Mead is down here, and about every Friday she brings over, 18 or 20 of her fine missionaries, and they help us put this together. I mean, this is kind of a unification project, you see. Now, very quickly, let me just run through a couple of things. You see, as I mentioned to all of those who attended the program in Paris on May, I think it was May the 22nd, actually everybody in the world wants three things. Every nation in the world wants three things. They instinctively want freedom for themselves, for their nation. They want freedom. Then they'd also like to have a little prosperity to go with it for themselves and their nation. And finally, they want peace from criminals, from mobs, and from invaders. Those are the three things everybody wants. In 1787, after experimenting and studying for 180 years, a small group of individuals on the Atlantic seaboard of what is now called the United States came up with the inspired formula for freedom, prosperity, and peace. It had never been put together before, at least in modern times. That formula grew out of intensive and fantastically in-depth study by a group of men that you can count on your two hands. I would say first and foremost among them was Thomas Jefferson. He learned 5 languages so that he could read it in the original language. Samuel Adams was right with him. He graduated with a master's degree from Harvard at 21. John Adams, his 13-year younger cousin, was also one of them. James Madison was another. Benjamin Franklin was another. And when they put it together, it was Washington who became the cheerleader. He said, those are sound principles. I've been fighting so much and trying to hold this thing together. I haven't had a chance to look at the books the way you fellows have. But I want to tell you, your principles are right. And so he became their supporter and backer, and he was the hero of the nation. And as Madison told him when he was too sick to come to the Constitutional Convention, General Washington, if you're not here, this country will fall apart. There will be no United States. If you have to come on a stretcher, be here. We need you. His brother had just died. His mother was about to die. His sister was very ill. And he was so ill with rheumatism as a result of being in the open camps of military endeavor that he couldn't even stand a sheet over his feet. And having suffered from rheumatism myself when I was younger, I know how terribly painful that disease can be. And so with his right arm strapped to his chest so he could endure the pain in his elbow and his shoulder, he made his way to Philadelphia and arrived on the day he was supposed to be there. Was made president of the Constitutional Convention. They thought they'd be there for a few weeks. They were there for 4 months, and most of them living on borrowed money by the time the convention was finished. What they came up with was absolutely fantastic. What Jefferson had discovered and shared with some of the others who also had verified it was that in ancient history there were two peoples who succeeded in establishing a system of representative government designed to provide freedom, prosperity, and peace. You might be surprised at the oldest one. Thomas Jefferson was an excellent student of the Bible. Some people said he was a deist and a non-Christian. They didn't know Thomas Jefferson. He was just critical of some of the mainstream churches. And when you criticize mainstream churches, you become a cultist. I don't know whether you knew that or not. But in any event, that's what he did. Nearly all the founding fathers criticized the mainstream churches, that they had distorted the original values of Christianity and its original integrity and strength, and they were just trying to get them to be in line because they were depending upon the churches to sustain the moral foundation on which they were going to build the country. They wanted them to be correct and right in motivation and in the execution of their missions. But in any event, he studied the Bible till people thought he was a minister at times, and he discovered that the first system of representative government in the history of the world was ancient Israel. Now, when Moses came out of Egypt, he knew nothing about representative government. He was trained under the Pharaoh for 40 years, and Josephus said he was being prepared to be the next Pharaoh and be a man with power over the life and death of all his subjects. He gets to the base of Mount Sinai, and his father-in-law Jethro says, "My son, what thou doest is not good. Thou wilt wear out thyself and all this people. No man will go to his tent in peace." Well, Moses had worked all day trying to judge the people and solve their problems. He got no lunch. He had no supper. He fell into bed. Jethro said, "What thou doest is not good." He said, "Now I will tell you how to do it. I'll tell you how to organize the people." And he turned that from a one-man government until Moses brags in the first chapter of Deuteronomy that they set up their judges over tens, fifties, hundreds, and thousands, and ended up with 75,000 rulers over the people, all of them elected over their respective branches. And Moses is proud of the fact that it worked so well. He talks about it, etc. Founding fathers made that discovery. I don't know how many thousands of scholars read that material and didn't get it, didn't pick it up. They did. Then they noticed that the Anglo-Saxons, with a rather amazing history we have now traced, brought those same institutes of liberty up into all of Northern Europe and Scandinavia and eventually into England. Same principles, same organization, same principles of justice, the same approach to power, political power. You must divide it, balance it, and limit it. That's ancient Israel, that's Anglo-Saxon. Existed nowhere else in the world. Having established these principles, the founders then set about and said, now, how do we reproduce that in modern times? That's one of the most exciting stories of how those men with that vision and that insight that I consider inspired, it was inspired when it came down from Mount Sinai and Moses used it. It was inspired when the founding fathers discovered and put it into operation. So what are they going to set up? I'll tell you very briefly what it was. They said, first of all, we have to start out the same way Israel did. You must have a very fundamental, basic code of moral principles that all of the people are willing to sustain or suffer the results, consequences of it. That's why the founding fathers said we have to start out in building our system on universal religious principles. They kept saying it. They sometimes called it the universal religion. They sometimes call it the American religion. It took me 2 years to find out what religion they're talking about. You know, they passed a law the very year they adopted the Constitution that religion has to be taught in the schools. Now, that's pretty scary. Whose religion? Doesn't that occur to your mind? Whose religion? Oh, they said, you know, the universal religion. What religion is that? Took me 2 years to find it. It's exciting. Let me share it with you. Here are the 5 principles every religion believes. Buddhists believe it. Muslims believe it. Jews believe it. Catholics believe it. Protestants believe it. Unification believes it. Mormons believe it. 5 principles. Number 1, recognize that the center of our existence is God, who created all things. That's fundamental with the founder. Number 2, recognize that he has revealed. Now this is William Blackstone in the Common Law Commentaries, the most famous books on the law of England and America, saying it. Number 2, God has revealed a moral code of principles for happy living to distinguish right from wrong. Our moral code is revealed. We didn't think it up. It isn't out of a book of ethics. God said, thou shalt not steal. God said, thou shalt not lie. God said, thou shalt not covet. God said, thou shalt not commit adultery. God said, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. You see, you can't have a much better authority than our Creator for telling us what's right and what's wrong. And William Blackstone said, and that's the foundation of justice and law if we'll just practice it. And then number 3, God holds us responsible for the way we treat each other. And number 4, we do live beyond this life. We are immortal, as Benjamin Franklin, every one of the founders said. Just remember, you're immortal. You're going back to your Creator. Just don't forget that. Read about it in Revelations, where it says we go back. And the books are opened. And the book of life is recorded there. It used to sound like a fairy tale, but no, computers have got it all now. Yeah, they can get it. If we can do it, they can do it. Anyway, the books will be open. And we are actually judged in the next life for what we did in this life. For anything that we did not overcome and extinguish from our lives by what we call repentance or reform and the sanctifying blood of the Savior. That combination can blot out part of the computer. That's just so great. We're going to be so thankful for that. Because I think we're going to see the history of the world just before the judgment. If that turns out to be the case, it's going to be pretty exciting watching the day you were born. And part of the time you'll hope nobody else is looking. But the books assure us that we will be seen as we are seen and known as we are known. That kind of gives me a hint. Maybe our lives will be shown. But it'll be nice to have a blackout here and there. In any event, that's part of the great message of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that you can change the past. You actually can change your past. You can clean it up. And that's the word purpose of life, to find out what's wrong and clean it up. Anyway, those are the 5 principles. that there is a God, that he's revealed a moral principles to guide us. Number 3, he holds us responsible for the way we treat each other. And we live beyond this life, and in the next life, we come before God in judgment, and we're judged according to what we did in this life. Isn't that great? That's fundamental. They wanted that taught in all the schools. How do you like that? That's the religion that they wanted taught, and they put that in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. The schools must teach religion. And of course, when people said, what religion? They said, you know, the universal religion. We don't want any establishment of religion. That's a creed. Don't want a creed. Just want these 5 things. All right, now that was the foundation. Now they said you must develop a system most likely to protect man's inalienable rights. And I guess I ought to start out by saying what's inalienable. You know, we talk about inalienable rights. I know, I've asked college students, and I've asked PhDs, bless their souls, majors in political science, who, like me, thought they had been trained in fundamental truth, and we had not. And I say, for example, define for me an unalienable right. Well, you know, that's one of our basic rights. I say, I know, define one for me. Well, you know, life, liberty, and happiness. Oh, I said, is that all? Jefferson said, among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What's some more? Name a few more just for fun. Let me see. A jury? No, that's not unalienable. An unalienable right is one given of God that cannot be violated without arousing the wrath of God. That's the definition for an unalienable right. Any other right is a vested right. A jury is a vested right. We didn't always have juries. Israel didn't have juries, neither did the Anglo-Saxons. Juries we put in there to try and keep the government from abusing us. We want our neighbors to be sitting on that jury that understands us and doesn't want to see us abused, and if they don't want us to be convicted, they say no. But that's not unalienable. That's just put in the Constitution to protect us. Is there ever a time when you wouldn't want a jury? Yeah. For example, supposing, let us say, there's a lynching mob, and they're about ready to string one up. And the sheriff rides up, you know, gun smoke stuff. And he rides up and he gets his gun out and he says, back, fellows, this is law and order. We got to have this man receive a fair trial. They say, oh, shucks, Sheriff, you're spoiling our party. So that's all right. I'm in charge here. Marshal he is, not just a sheriff. He was a marshal. And so he said, now back off. We're going to get ourselves a jury. I want 12 of you fellows. 1, 2, 3, 4. I like that. So they have a trial. Does he still hang? See, that's no protection. Anytime your jury is selected out of the mob, you get no protection. See, now the lawyers for Reverend Moon saw that. They had already checked the jury pool. There had been so much adverse publicity, they were ready to convict on any count. Didn't matter what the accusation was. Let's just get a conviction here and, you know, get this thing out of the way. It's not a fair trial. And Senator Hatch, who's in charge of the Constitution Committee for the Senate, was shocked when he found out that our code provides that you cannot dismiss the possibility of a jury without the consent of the prosecution. Well, the marshal wouldn't go along with that. He wants part of the mob to be on the jury because it's a guaranteed statistic. Conviction. It's not America. That's not America. We got a lot of things in our code today that aren't America. That's why we're teaching people. That's why we're trying to train people. We're trying to get some lawyers, some senators, and some congressmen that know what the original formula was for freedom, prosperity, and peace. They've almost emasculated it. And so Reverend Moon never got a fair trial. And he didn't get a fair appeal. Even 40 amicus briefs didn't bring the Supreme Court to its senses sufficiently to realize there had been a great impasse in our justice system. And I've so admired the attitude of Reverend Moon. You know, the first time I met him was in Senator Hatch's office, and it was sort of a spontaneous feeling as we both embraced one another. We'd never met before, but I felt a great kindred spirit that had a mission from God, and I felt a warmth and empathy of greatness. And I felt it so strongly that I put his testimony that came later that morning before the Senate committee in that issue of the Freeman Digest. And if you haven't read it, read his magnificent message to the American people of why he came over to this country and what it had cost in time and effort and sweat, blood, and tears to try and get their attention. And when all he was trying to do was to get them to unify and fight evil. Unify and fight evil. Anyway, I don't know how long it's going to last, but I don't think too much longer. I hope not. In any event, his attitude, magnificent. He sort of finds joy in whatever he's required to do. And if this is the way you have to get the attention of the American people and realize how much injustice there is being inflicted on some of their fellow citizens, so be it. And that's what he said in his testimony. I'll pay that price. I'll pay with my life. I would pay with every cent I had. I'd even borrow money, he said, to save this country. This is the key to the freedom and peace of the world, God says. And I believe that. No, very quickly now, because you've got a very fast clock up there. I'm kind of watching it. Now, the third unique thing about the founders' formula was that they divided political power vertically and horizontally. Never been done before. It wasn't done in England. It really hasn't been done in any country since. Even when we wrote the model constitution for Canada, we found the members of the Parliament really balking at the concept of separation of powers. But you won't get freedom and security from tyranny and despotism if you don't have it. And number 4, they took this divided political power and balanced it with one power balanced against another. That had never been done before. These are all inventions taken right out of the Old Testament as they were set up by Moses under the direction of his father-in-law Jethro, who was a high priest and who knew a little bit more about it than he did at the time. And then number 5, they put chains in the Constitution to limit, and that's the word, to limit political power wherever it was vested. Now, having accomplished that, having done that, they wanted our people to be able to point to those chains in case someone tried to smash them. Actually, our chains rusted away. On occasion, they were broken. Most of the time, they just rusted away from neglect. Our American people don't know where the chains are anymore. So I went through and I analyzed the Constitution and the amendments, and guess how many chains there were? Over 280 rights are guaranteed in the Constitution. Originally. And you've lost a lot of them. And they got to be restored. Now, there is a way to restore it. It's important, first of all, to recognize that we have stopped studying the Founding Fathers' original great discovery. We haven't studied it for over 2 generations at least. The last excellent commentary on the Constitution was 1850 by Justice Story. We also stopped studying and practicing the principles which God revealed to Moses for a sound system of representative government, which was copied by the Anglo-Saxons. Amazing, those 2 people had the same systems. We took morality, prayer, and Bible reading out of the schools. We began calling the Constitution obsolete. And then we began concentrating political power in Washington and began suffering tyranny, despotism, and it got too big, too expensive to fight. Our founding fathers said, you know, you're going to have some regulatory programs, but always keep them local. Or you can go down and say, Joe, this isn't working, this is an imposition, etc. You can afford to do that. If it's Washington, it costs you $2,000 just to get it from the inactive file over into the active file box. When OSHA was operating, we had a man by the name of Bill Barlow. He'd just been through one of our courses, and OSHA came to inspect his plant. Well, he said, what have I done wrong? He said, we don't know. We don't think you've done anything wrong. Well, he said, that's good. Goodbye. Well, no, he said, wait a minute, we have to inspect your plant. He said, you might not, I don't think you know what you're talking about. This happens to be private property. He said, I know, but we're the government. He said, yeah, and I'm the taxpayer. And they said, you know, but here's my manual. We're allowed to inspect your plant. And he said, here's my Constitution. It says you can't. I just came through a course. For you to come on my property, you've got to have a warrant sworn out before a judge with probable cause. You've got to take an oath that I've done something wrong. If I have, tell me about it, and you're welcome aboard. Otherwise, goodbye. This OSHA inspector wasn't a bad man. He was just a government bureaucrat trying to earn his living. He went back to his boss and he said, we got a real maverick down the road there. You know, he won't even let me inspect his plant. He doesn't even know that we got laws that say we can go through the plant. Oh, his boss said, we got to get this up to headquarters. And headquarters in Washington said, take him to court. Took him to court, and guess what? The judge said, OSHA, did you ever read the Constitution? No, you got to have a warrant to go in there. Oh, they said, you're so old-fashioned. So they appealed it. And the appellate court said, yeah, that's right, you got to have a warrant. Well, they said, this is just absolutely ridiculous. These judges out here must be colonials. They don't know what's going on here. We'll appeal this to Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court sustained it and read the Riot Act to OSHA, so that now all of the United States today, OSHA can't come into your private plant without a warrant sworn out before a judge. Now, the lesson to be learned from this is the fact that the one violation that probably existed in his plant would have cost him $500. And had he allowed the inspection to take place, they would have said, that saw ought to be covered. And he would have replied, it doesn't saw if you cover it. And furthermore, we've had it for 20 years without an accident when we train people, right? They said, well, he might have said, well, it looks dangerous to me, never having used a saw. So he would have said, it's $500. Bill Barlow would have contacted his attorney, and the attorney would say, well, I think for retainer's fee of about $5,000, I could get that through the preliminary hearings at least. It'll take a lot of research. Bill Barlow's a businessman. 500, 10 times more, 5,000. I'm still not sure I'll come. See what the mind does? See what the founding fathers are talking about? Don't ever give that to the federal government. It's too big and it's too expensive. You'll take it lying down, and people have done it all over the country. Till Bill Barlow. Cost him $125,000 to win back that simple little freedom for the American people. It's wrong. Wrong on principle. Now, we've got to train people how to start thinking like Americans. And number two, we've got to get some of them elected into Congress. We've got to get some of them on the bench. We've got to get some of them in the state legislatures. They've got to be mayors and city councilmen. And we're beginning to do it. And I'm going to tell you how we do it after you kind of stand up and have just a little stretch while we pass out our little pamphlets. passing them out, some of you, particularly in the West, although elsewhere as well, may have seen that Howard Ruff wrote in his newsletter his concept of Reverend Moon's situation and of the Unification Church program. Now, I know Howard Ruff very well. He is not a vindictive person, and he's not a dishonest person. He just didn't have the facts. And the article was actually written by one of his associates who also didn't have the facts. And so I have answered him in this issue of the Freeman Digest. And so if you ask for it, it's the October issue of the Freeman Digest. And I brought just a little pile of them here, but I wish I could have brought one for each one of you. But I had a lot of other things I had to bring, and the suitcase didn't hold anymore. But anyway, it's in there with a complete explanation of what he didn't know that he should have known. And I try to be generous with him because he wrote it in ignorance. And you have to be generous with people when they make mistakes in ignorance. And I think he'll be fair enough to retract when he gets the facts. He's been that kind of a person. He's retracted before on things that we've pointed out to him. Now, 1971, when Reverend Moon arrived in America, I didn't know it. I didn't know that he felt a great mission to awaken America as the keystone to the freedom and well-being of the rest of the world. See, this was the first free people in modern times. It wasn't just Englishmen. There were Swedes here and Germans, and there were blacks and so forth. You see, it was everything, and it's gotten to be more of a hodgepodge homogeneity ever since. So we really are the human family. On this, there's no other country where the whole human family's gathered together. It's right here. That's the same year that I felt this compelling, and I say compelling, anxiety to get my family to be willing to divide half our income, and we lived on half. University professor doesn't make too much, but we lived on half, and I put the other half in renting a little building and getting a telephone, the secretary, and that's how we started out what we originally called the Freeman Institute. And we started doing our research. I'd been on this for quite a while. I'd been on it for nearly 30 years. I read over 125 volumes of the founder's original writing. I knew as a constitutional lawyer we were way off base. How do you teach our people to get back on base? That was a real challenge. It's taken us 13 years to get to where we now are. But anyway, it's moving now. All right, now I just want you to go down this little pamphlet very briefly with me now, because this is what we are training our people in. I'll just read this little tiny bit to you right here at the beginning. A series of 8 courses is presently being conducted in Washington, D.C. for government and private sector leaders. Each of these courses is 6 hours in length. The usual procedure is to present each 6-hour course on Friday or Saturday and space the courses 1 month apart. These same courses are also being made available to communities, schools, and federal or state employees in various parts of the country. Booking a series of these courses requires 100 or more pre-registered participants per seminar. The cost being $15 per person or $25 per family. A comprehensive text is provided for each participant. Now, when I first set this program up, I and my board resolved that it was a mission and therefore we would receive no compensation for our work, which we have not. However, to just keep it going as a going concern, we've tried to level out the costs. This is the kind of a seminar that would cost $300 at any university. It costs the individual $15, and it brings his whole family for $25, and they all get a text. There's a text with every one of the 6 seminars. The National Center for Constitutional Studies publishes a monthly magazine called the Freeman Digest, which supplements these courses and analyzes current issues. A subscription to the Freeman Digest is $30 per year. Now, a summary of the courses presented by NCCS is as follows. Now, the Roots of America is important because I like to take people on Thomas Jefferson's expedition. You'll love Thomas Jefferson when you realize how much studying he did out of the classics. And I've been forcing myself for 40 years to read the same thing. I want to tell you, that's a task. That's like reading an encyclopedia. And my wife will say, don't you want to watch this TV? And I say, no, I got to go back down to the salt mine. And so I go down there and I work on Thomas Jefferson's curriculum. But I began to get the big vision of the greatness of what they discovered and the greatness of the men who discovered it. And then, too, the world's greatest success formula. Very few Americans, including lawyers, have ever really been through the 292 principles providing for 280 specific rights in the Constitution. It's never been taught to them that way. They learn the mechanics of the Constitution. They don't know what's behind it. What we do is to take every one of them apart, and in 6 hours you go through the whole thing, and when you're through, every phrase of the Constitution is just like a neon sign in front of you, because we don't use the words of the Constitution. We take the principle out. There they are, 292 principles. You say, now why aren't we doing that anymore? That's the question I want to keep hearing, especially from pre-law students or people running for office. Why aren't we doing that anymore? There is no excuse for our not doing it anymore. Got to go back. Got to go back. And then we come to the unhinging of America. Beginning about 1887, a group of 5 people was gradually coming into position that decided the Constitution was wrong. The ideology was wrong. The origin was wrong. And the hope of America was a completely different approach. Concentration of power in Washington. Those 5 groups eventually coalesced. They came from all different segments of the economy and the ideology. They coalesced, and in 1913 they took over the country. And they've never let go of it. They were determined to get us involved in wars. They were determined to meddle in the affairs of other countries. They were determined to get control of our money system and our debt system, our farms. Industrial democracy, which meant nationalizing all our industry. Those people began to get in charge. They've gained a little and lost some. Gained a little and lost some. In Europe they gained a lot. It's a failure formula. Founders knew all about it, wrote about it, warned us against it. Those 5 groups went for the failure formula. Now it's plaguing us to the points like a disease. Overtaxed, overregulated, underrepresented. National debt. We owe more money than all the rest of the countries of the world combined. And they say it isn't important. It's going to be very important to your generation if we don't solve it. Now that's the unhinging. You need to understand who was behind it, and we approach it sympathetically. We don't approach it in an accusatory way. They thought they were doing good. We just want people to know why it was not good. Then we come to the healing of America. Oh, I love to teach the healing of America. We take about 50 of the major problems facing America today and show you what we could do about Social Security. You love Social Security. We got some congressmen being elected today using our material running on Social Security alone. Everybody else is scared to death of it. Don't touch Social Security, they'll kill you. Not this. These men are being elected by saying, hey folks, how'd you like to have a Social Security system where you retire on $2,000 to $3,000 a month maybe, huh? With just a modest income going into it? You can do it. You can do it. Those people down there in Freeman Institute worked out a program. It's absolutely sound. So anyway, how do we get our money system back under control? We got that all worked out too. It was sort of interesting what the Social Security Commission said when they got our material. We sent it to the president, and he wrote me a nice letter and said, I've sent it on to the Social Security Commission. First one is called The Founders Classics. Now you don't have to take this in order to make a great contribution or understand, but it gives you a sense of, gives you a handle on the founders, because they keep quoting people you never heard of. I never heard of them before. Johannes Althusius, how do you like that? You ever heard of him before? Oh, the only German writer that caught the vision of the founders back in about 1600. Algernon Sidney. Oh, you've heard of him, of course. Never heard of Algernon Sidney. I'm only a major in this field. This is my major. I never heard of Algernon Sidney. Thomas Jefferson said, nobody graduates from the University of Virginia who hasn't read Algernon Sidney. Well, I wasn't particularly anxious to graduate from the University of Virginia, but I certainly thought I ought to know about Algernon Sidney. Found out this great man said in 1676 what the founder said in 1776, and Charles II beheaded him for saying it. And his very close friend, John Locke, who was just getting ready to write his second essay on civil government, decided it would be best if he finished his work in Holland. So he departed and went to Holland. That's Algernon Sidney. I had to go back to the Congressional Library to even get copies of it. No library had it. Bookstores didn't have it. Beautiful, great man. And you need to know Charles de Montesquieu. You need to know why Thomas Hobbes was rejected by the founders. And why did they reject Plato and call him a bunch of nonsense? Wow, my classical teachers told me he was the most brilliant of the ancient scholars. No, the founders said he was contradictory, didn't know what he was talking about, put it all in a dialogue of gobbledygook. John Adams said he was so bad, I read him in 3 different languages. I thought the translators must have fouled up. But he said he's that bad in the original. And so anyway, then why did they love Cicero? Our people need to know Cicero. They keep quoting Cicero. Assassinated 1 year after Julius Caesar. What was so great about Cicero? I didn't know that. And as I read him, you would have thought you were reading a great Christian scholar. You wouldn't believe that you're reading a pagan. He said the first thing to recognize is that we live in a God-centered universe. And that we are held responsible to God the way we treat our neighbors. And as the authorities say, can you imagine Cicero anticipating Christianity? Well, thou shalt love thy neighbors thyself comes right out of the Old Testament. I mean, that's how much they know about Christianity. But anyway, Cicero had that. I don't know where he got it from, but he's a great thinker, great believer in natural law. And now, we come now to the next one, and that's the American classics. And that's to give you 6 hours of the biographies of each of about the 6 main great probing, investigative founding fathers. You need to know their lives. You need to know that they said that Franklin was a profligate. He had 13 illegitimate children, you know. Had a great time while he was in France, you know. Any high school student knows that. Except it's a lie. It's a lie. Yale University did the research on it. Those stories are very recent, beginning about 1924, when the Rockefeller Foundation gave $400,000 to the American Historical Association to do a revisionist history on the founders. And I came through college just in time to get the blast of what they call the debunkers. The debunkers. They were lies. Franklin didn't have affairs with women over there. There was no evidence of it at all. They took letters and distorted them, abstracted little sayings. He was a very gracious person. He would write to a hostess, tell her how beautiful she was, and he was very eloquent. Boy, he could really describe them. And he'd say, and I love you and appreciate you. He was kind of like they are in Hollywood. They're a little bit demonstrative in their affections. And he said, and tell your husband I love him too, being, Ben Franklin. They said, see, that's an affair. Well, it wasn't an affair. All that's been cleaned up. And Washington or Jefferson was supposed to have had 6 children by one of his slave mistresses. You've heard that. A woman wrote a bestseller book not so long ago. Built around that. The deceit of the woman was in the fact that she had in her hand, at the time she wrote the book, attributing these children to Jefferson, the real father of those children was a lie. But that took all the fun out of it. That took all the profit out of it. So she tried to deprecate the reputation of Jefferson by making this sensational allegation, and you may have heard of that book. They say that Washington lied about his expense account. Wouldn't take his salary, you see, but he padded his expense account from $57,000 to $500,000. Pretty good return. Do you know who padded Washington's expense account? A man that wrote the book. He lied. And it's in nearly all the libraries. What are they trying to do? They want us to stop believing in the Founding Fathers. They want us to stop believing in their ideals. They want us to stop believing in dividing power, balancing power, and limiting power. They want to concentrate power. They don't want you to listen to the Founding Fathers. They want to take over the world. You need to know who they are and how they're going to do it. And then we take you through the 28 great ideas that are in the 5,000-year leap. And then last of all, when Freeman shall stand, and that's to teach you how to participate in the great American system. And without getting involved in a lot of partisan controversy, be an influence for good so that we might elect good people in both parties. And that we might have judges that will administer justice and not frauds. That's our course. And here's one of the things you'll find. The churches that have sponsored these have been some of our most successful because it brings people into their church. They do it right in their chapel. Because Christ teaches a God of liberty, you see, and they feel good about it, teaching right in church. It brings people of other denominations into the meeting. Provides a little fellowship. That does a lot of good. Second thing that it does, out of that group, it produces leaders. So I'm going to close now by telling you an exciting experience we had, which is becoming rather typical of what these courses are doing. We're not just talking to the choir. We're not just talking among ourselves. We're getting some results. We got congressmen now who are freemen. We got senators who are freemen. We had to talk like a Dutch uncle to Senator Hatch to get him to run. And he afterwards said, every place I go, people keep coming to me and say, I'm a Democrat, but I'm a freeman, so I'm supporting him. He was kind of shocked, kind of astonished. And he said to me, he said, you must have thousands of freemen. I said, well, we got a few out there. We got more than we know because once they've been through the course, we call them freemen. I mean, now they are informed, inspired, involved Americans, and that's freemen. Anyone else is just a resident citizen. Now, the biggest and most successful seminar ever taught was sponsored by two of the biggest churches in Tulsa, Oklahoma. One's a Methodist church, the other's the biggest Baptist church. They ordinarily compete. On this, they united. And they had the meeting in the big, beautiful auditorium of the Oral Roberts University. I got 1,400 lawyers, teachers, doctors, community leaders. The mayor has declared it Freeman Week. I mean, you couldn't have a better environment in which to teach. So naturally, I'm thrilled to pieces, and I'm lecturing away and inspired by the situation. And a young fellow came up to me as we're getting toward the end of it, and he said, you know, Dr. Skousen, when I think how exciting this information is, and what a lousy job our two senators are doing, I'm embarrassed for them. I'm embarrassed for Oklahoma. And I said, well, they are kind of weak. They vote against the Constitution over half the time. He says, you know, one of them's running for office this year, and he's already started his campaign. And I said, yes, I understand that. I said, do you have someone strong to run against him? He said, yeah, I think I will. Now, he looked like about 23. He looked very young. Looked like he shaved regularly, once a week maybe, but pretty young. And so when I get young people like that, they get all full of zeal, I have to let them down gradually and bring them back down to terra firma. So I started out and I said, well, of course, you know, running for senator, that's pretty big stuff, and you have to be at least 30, you know, to run. He said, yeah, I am. Are you 30? He said, I will be by the time I would be sworn in. And I said, well, that's all you have to be. You can be 20. You can run at 29. You got to be 30. He said, I'll be 30. I said, well, you see, a Senate, that's big stuff. That's varsity. And you've got to know all the angles. A lot of big black traps you've got to know about. You can really get hooked in in politics. You really got to know all the tricks of the game. And he said, boy, are you right. Man, he said, I'm county commissioner here, and I've been in politics since I was 18, and you really got to know the tricks of the trade. I said, are you county commissioner here? Yeah. Yeah, I've been elected twice. I said, well, there's one other thing I ought to mention to you. When you run for the Senate, I mean, you're running against power. There are people that want a liberal senator in there, and they'll pour labor union money and all kinds of things in here to try and defeat anybody that runs on the principles we've been talking about here at this seminar. I'd say you've got to have at least $1 million to start with. And I know that, and I got it. I said, you're serious about running, aren't you? And he said, you betcha, I am. And I'm going to run as a constitutionalist. I'm going to tell people, don't vote for me unless you want somebody back there to restore the Constitution, because that's why I'm going back, and that's the only reason I'm going back. Guess what? Today he is the youngest member of the United States Senate, Don Nichols. So anyway, I close now because the time has run out. I was supposed to save some time for questions, but I hope at least I took the time to answer some questions. And I just want to say this in closing. You see, when Skousen comes along and demolishes Marxism, emphasizes the need for restoring God. You see that familiar spirit? That's founding father doctrine. And we then need to come along with a program that says, all right, folks, look, here is the great story. We must revive it in the United States and export it. Just as Skousen has to export, our freedom story has to go right on top of it so that we don't get a vacuum. So you can throw communists out like they did in Chile, but they didn't know what to do after Allende's out. They didn't have the formula. And we got to come up with a formula. That's what the National Center for Constitutional Studies was for. And I will be thrilled the day we change our name to the International Center of Constitutional Studies. Now, our whole program and our whole approach is to have people feel at home with the program. To know that it isn't exploiting them economically. Nobody's trying to brainwash them. Anything that we're selling them is sold them at modest cost, just so we come out and can keep going. Any magazine that we sent them is our honest, best thinking, and if anybody's got any better ideas, we're glad to correct them and pass it on. We're kind of a channel for what we believe to be correct and true. That's all. Because time is running out, not on us, but on the whole human race. This program is on a time schedule, and God said it in the very beginning. And the book of Revelations describes it. And it's running tight now, very tight. There isn't a tremendous amount of time left, and there's a great promise that God has made to those who have the truth, that if they'll do their part, he'll do the rest. And he always does a lot more than we have to do. But we do have to do our part. And so I close by saying, God bless you all. And if you will do your part and reach out and unify people of all faiths to fight evil, God will bless you. And I know that he intended from the beginning that if we would do our part, we will win. Thank you.